Sojourner Truth grew up speaking Dutch, and when she was 9, she was sold for $100 to an English-speaking family. When she couldn't follow instructions in English, she was beaten with rods that had been heated in the fire until her back was lacerated and bleeding. In her whole life, when she heard of a slave being whipped, she remembered in her body her own experience of violence, and she said, "When I hear 'em tell of whipping women on the bare flesh, it makes my flesh crawl and my very hair rise on my head. Oh God, what a way is this of treating human beings." Later, when she fell in love with a slave in a different household, he was beaten almost to death in front of her. When he went against his master's orders and tried to meet her, her son Peter was taken from her, and she won him back. Like the songs we sing, the spirituals we love to sing and hear, joy and sorrow were intertwined in the fabric of her life. And within those songs, as within her life, was a deep longing for the holy. She found an anchor for the shifting uncertainty of her life in a holy presence that held her and gave her the strength and confidence she needed to walk out of slavery, to stomp out of slavery, and dedicate her life to preaching her truth about God and about the evils of slavery. Her presence in the pulpit embodied freedom. In 1852, she walked into the meeting house in Akron at the Ohio Women's Rights Convention. The other men and women, all white, had already taken their seats. And as she stood at the back of the church and looked out over them, looking for a chair, as I have seen people in the back of this sanctuary looking for chairs, and there weren't any but up in the front row, as often happens. So she took a moment, and then she strode up to the front of the church. But she didn't sit on the front row. She sat on a step, like the step in front of me. She sat on one of the steps leading up to the pulpit. Some people were surely sighing, "Oh no," and thinking, "Ugh, she's going to ruin it." You see, this was an annual convention on women's rights. The speakers wanted to talk about whether women deserved to have the same rights as men, and they were guessing that she wanted to talk about abolition. Frances Gage, a woman, presided over the meeting, and one after another the speakers came up to talk, and during the break they gathered around Frances and they said, "Keep that Sojourner Truth from speaking." But Gage refused to promise, and Sojourner Truth kept her seat through the whole first day she sat on that step. And the whole of the next morning, she listened to clergymen speak about how men were entitled to the superior rights and privileges, and that women had a lower status than men because of the original sin committed by Eve in the Garden of Eden, and that the inherent inferiority of men was proven by their need to have men hold doors open for them. Sounds like what we heard over the Equal Rights Amendment not that long ago. Women did not deserve the same rights as women did not deserve the same rights as men because they were so much weaker. After the last minister spoke, Sojourner Truth stood up and walked up to the lectern. "Don't let her speak," a group of men cried to the moderator. Frances Gage hesitated for a moment. And then she introduced Sojourner Truth to that group. Truth turned to the minister who had said that women were too weak to deserve equal rights. "How could that be?" she asked. "Nobody had ever helped me over a mud puddle or ever given me the best place anywhere." She pulled herself upright to her full 6 feet of height in a loud voice which sounded like some, and they wrote this down, like rolling thunder. She said, "And ain't I a woman? Look at me, look at my arm." And she rolled up, which I cannot do, her sleeve up to her shoulder. It was not a plump arm that she showed people. It was lean and sinewy from many years of hard labor. "I have plowed," she said, "and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman?" She declared that she had worked as hard as any man, and that she could eat as much as any man, although many times she had gone hungry. She had borne children only to watch them be sold into slavery. And when she missed them and cried, she said, "No one but Jesus heard my sobs." Sojourner Truth brought a living truth to the pulpit, both of what it meant to be a slave and what it meant to be a woman. By the end of her talk, the room erupted into applause. Her words had cracked open hearts and transformed the stereotype of who was a woman. The truth of her story led the way to freedom. Do you sometimes long for freedom? On the surface, we are free, and yet when I sing a spiritual, I feel a deep longing. The words and music of spirituals become a vehicle for all the joy and sorrow of our lives and voice our human desire to be free. Some of us in this room, many of us, hold experiences of being oppressed and of painfully losing children during a divorce. But only a few of us hold the history, the legacy of being enslaved. There are 2 parts of Sojourner Truth's legacy that I wanted to give to you today, that I want to articulate, that have been difficult for me to see. One is that while I want to see myself in her journey to freedom, I also must see that my ancestry clearly lies with the oppressors, the white European slave owners. As many of you, my family history has been researched, some places back to Adam. Don't tell anyone. And at around 1740 on my father's side, the Willis line disappears into North Carolina and Tennessee. Were they slave owners? I don't have any evidence of this, but Willis is the 105th most common name for African Americans. and my grandmother's last name, Porter, is the 106th most common name. I wonder how many of us in this room are connected through uncles and aunts or cousins many times removed to the slave owners, or how many of our ancestors tolerated that injustice, reaped the benefits of a society that enslaved. Do singing spirituals unleash the longing in our hearts to be free from racism? The racism that is still a part of the fabric of this society. In a recent meeting I attended of Unitarian Universalist ministers, I was blessed to be able to hear one of the best preachers on this earth, Reverend James Forbes. He talked about the great giants that threaten our peace, the isms, the racism that undergirds our economy and legal and education systems, the materialism that keeps us from making tough choices to save our environment. Over and over again, we have opted for a robust economy over clean air. Will we ever be free from the chains that bind us to behavior that leads us into war and the devastation of our earth? Most days, I must admit, that true change feels impossible. And then I think of Sojourner Truth and how she kept the vision in the midst of all the impossibility around her. And now we come to the second part of her life that made my brow furrow and wonder how I could articulate this to you. Sojourner Truth's legacy is a legacy of prayer. When Sojourner Truth encountered impossibility, she prayed. Her prayers, that connection with the holy, with a higher power, helped her to gain and keep a vision of the possibilities of life beyond slavery. For many of us, the word prayer sends chills through us. Some of us were taught a way to pray that no longer suits us. Some of us even have a kind of PTSD associated with prayer because we asked ourselves, or we were asked to ask ourselves, to change something that was our essence. Prayer has been used as a bludgeon. I know that because I used prayer that way for years. And yet, Sojourner Truth's life is clear. Her vision came through her prayers, and that vision led her to transformation. Prayer opened up for me in Japan when someone, a Buddhist priest I was studying with, told me that meditation was a listening prayer. In fact, my teacher thought that other kinds of prayer, this supplication, was kind of silly. That this asking for things was like, well, she wouldn't have used these words, but like God was Santa Claus. But that meditation was a way of listening. From that time, I gingerly, and I must say fearfully, began to pray, not in supplication, as I had, but in quietly listening. I prayed to the night sky, under the night sky, when Lou and I watched for falling stars. I prayed to the mystery that Albert Einstein saw when he looked out to the universe, and to that loving presence that would protect Sojourner Truth on her journey ahead. And today my prayer is to see the possibility of what could be. What impossibilities stand before you? What does your voice want to speak to power? When Sojourner Truth was discouraged and she prayed to see beyond her discouragement, she found a vision. And that prayer can empower us with a vision beyond the suffering around us. I pray for a vision where gay teenagers will not commit suicide, where they will find shelter and love. I have also begun to pray for a vision of a winter that is free of dangerous smog, where there are no days when it is dangerous for our children and loved ones to walk or run around one of our beautiful parks. I pray for a vision of what I could do, what we could do to make those visions reality. What vision would you like to see? This next Tuesday morning at 9:15, I will be giving the prayer in our Capitol building. A prayer that the lawmakers can see a vision of what can be. And I will bring your vision with me. I will pray that they will walk through their days with compassion and that their lawmaking will be done in that spirit. The history of Unitarian Universalism is full of people with visions who have articulated them and changed the world. To give us hope in the change that we can make, I invoke their names so that they can stand with us and Sojourner Truth in our place of prayer and vision. These were all Unitarian Universalists. George Washington, John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Paul Revere, Adlai Stevenson, William Howard Taft, Dorothea Dix, who drastically improved the situation of the mentally ill, Henry Bergh, creator of the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, Clara Barton, founded the American Red Cross, Susan B. Anthony worked for women's right to vote. Elizabeth Cady Stanton worked for women's rights. James Reeb died in Alabama, and his death was the catalyst for passing the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Roger Baldwin, founder of the American Civil Liberties Union. Mary White Ovington, founder of the NAACP, Florence Nightingale, Oliver Wendell Holmes, and all of us. Let us lift our voices and pray that our feet will be guided toward the vision we can see. May it be so. Amen.